Hello everyone and welcome to another Flux tutorial. I am Zach Peterson and today we're going to be talking about how to use a set of sub-layouts to create a new project in Flux. Now the sub-layout system is probably my favorite feature about Flux. It's very cool because it allows you to combine your old projects into something totally new, and all you have to do is import your old projects into a new project and combine them in unique ways. So if you've never done this before, follow along to get a tutorial to see how to use sub-layouts to create a new project. So I am inside a new project in Flux, and I've already brought a couple of components into this project. So the first is just a 4-pin header that you can find in the library, and you can just search here, header, and of course you'll find a whole selection of headers. And then here I have the example STM32F03 sub-layout. Now, if you're unsure how to create and publish sub-layouts, make sure to check the links in the description to see what exactly these objects are. But just to summarize, basically when you are creating a project entirely from sub-layouts, all of these sub-layouts basically work like parts. So what I can do here is I can go into the search bar and I can search for, say, this haptic controller, and I can just drag it into my project and start using it like any other part. So here with this resistor ladder, I can also just drag this in and start connecting everything up. So I'm going to make some connections here, and they're not necessarily going to be anything super specific, but it's just going to illustrate what we can do once we actually get into the PCB layout. So here, as we start making these connections, what we're doing is we're essentially defining the connections between ports that are going to be placed in these sub-layouts. Now, the connections that you see here around the edge of this box, that's essentially the same type of connection that you would have here on a component. You're just going to wire a trace into it. And in fact, when you first pull up a sub-layout, what you can do is you can right-click here and open this sub-layout, and you'll be able to actually inspect that sub-layout and see what it looks like before you start using it in your project. So here what I've done is I've just opened up the STM32 sub-layout. If I go in here to the PCB, you'll be able to see what the layout for this portion of my project is going to look like. So this is what the STM32F03 portion looks like in the original project. But then when I import it into my new project and I start to connect everything up, and then let's just say I make this connection here, and then I go into the PCB layout, now you're going to see all of the different pieces that we added in the schematic are going to appear together inside of my new PCB layout. So here's the STM32, which is exactly what we opened up over here, and you can see it appears here. And so the connections that we have defined around the edge of this sub-layout here in these white dots, those actually appear here as well in this original sub-layout. And so the way this sub-layout was created was definitely following best practices, because you can see here that the various ports that we need to route into are located around the edge of the sub-layout. So it's going to be very easy for us to then take these schematic connections and then map them to a real connection inside the PCB layout. And you can see right here we have a ghost wire illustrating where we'll need to make a connection between our STM32 and then our resistor ladder right here. So the way you would want to arrange this is, of course, in such a way that these connections are very easy to create. So just drag it around however you like, and then of course you can start wiring up the traces just like you would with any other group of parts. So I think that's the important takeaway here, is that the way the sub-layout system works in Flux is that each of these little bits of the layout functions just like a part, and it inherits its design rules from the original part as defined in this sub-layout. So you can keep going with this. You can just keep adding in new sub-layouts. You can obviously, go back to the schematic. You can then search for other parts or sub-layouts here in the library, and then you can just drag them in and start connecting them up. So it's, like I said, a very easy way to quickly start creating a new design from any of your old designs that you've published into the library. Now, when you're working on a project that's composed entirely of sublayouts, I think if you look at this schematic, it may seem as if these sublayouts are set in stone and they can't be modified. Now, that's not exactly true. What you can do is you can actually go in and make modifications to these sublayouts, and there's a couple ways you can do that. So let's just look at this STM32 sublayout for the moment as an example. So I'm going to open it up. And let's just suppose that in this sublayout, I want to expose more of the pins on the microcontroller so that I could wire this up to these other parts or these other sublayouts in my projects. Well, what I would need to do is go in, and then I need to use a terminal. And this terminal can then be wired to different pins on the microcontroller, and you can see that there's a lot of unused pins on this microcontroller. And then once I publish that change to the library, I could then import that sublayout back in here, and then those additional pins are going to be exposed. Now, this particular sublayout is owned by somebody else. So I can't just start making modifications to it because I don't have edit privileges. But what I can do is I can go in and I can clone or fork the project. And to learn more about cloning and forking, we actually have a video in the description that explains all of this. So make sure to review that video to learn more about the version control system. But after cloning or forking and then making my own changes, I can then publish those changes to the public library, and then I can add in that modified sublayout into my schematics, and then I'll be able to make those changes in the schematic and wire it up how I want. The other thing that I can do is if I'm working with my own sublayouts, then what I can do is I can make modifications to my own sublayout and then propagate those changes back into my new project. So this particular sublayout right here, this 6x resistor ladder, this was forked from another project and then published back to the library. And so if I want, what I can do is I can open this, and then I can make changes to this sub layout. And once I make these changes into this sub layout, I'll have the option to then propagate those changes back into this project that I'm building from these sub layouts. So let's just suppose for a moment that I take this resistor, and let's say I change it from 1K to 10K, just as an example. So once I make that change, then what I can do is after it saves, I can publish those changes, and then I'll want to include a note here, changed 1K to 10K, and then I publish that. And then you'll see that the changes are published successfully. And then you'll notice as soon as I come back in here, there's a message in the lower left portion of the screen. Updates are available for your parts. So at this point you could then review, and then you'll see here that I already have this notification changed 1K to 10K, and I can choose to accept that update, or I can just close this and ignore it. So if I click update, you'll then see that the part was successfully updated, and that information now exists within this sub layout. And so any changes that I make in this sub layout can then be imported back into my overall project using that same window. And whether it's a schematic change or a PCB layout change, those changes will get imported and then they will appear in the PCB layout. Now, if you make updates to the PCB layout, make sure that you review those to ensure that you don't break anything in your layout, and to ensure that any of those connections that you want exposed do actually appear in the location that you want them, and that they don't create something like an unintentional short circuit. So that's an important point to review. Just make sure that you do that, because it is something that you might need to do manually once you import any changes into these sublayouts into your project. So I think this is a great time to summarize how sublayouts work in Flux. Basically, all of your sublayouts work just like parts. And that means you can wire them up to each other in the schematics. You can wire sublayouts to other parts. And then when you put them into the PCB layout, you just draw the trace connections between terminals, just like you would with any other component. So it's a great time saver, and it's a really cool thing that is unique in Flux that you won't find in other programs. All right, thanks everybody for watching. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave any comments or questions in the comments section. Thanks everybody.